years. It's one of my favorite courthouse buildings. I feel like I've been in those 10 years. I've crawled through just about every nook and cranny that this building has to offer. But I'm still discovering things even today that answer questions that we've had for a long time. So, we're going to talk tonight a little bit about the history and the architecture of this building. Obviously, it's from the time it's built, it's been through multiple editions, and we're kind of going to go through what those were and how they changed the appearance and use of the building over time. And then, assuming I don't talk too long, we're going to talk about some of the recent work that we've been doing in various phases to stabilize the building and increase accessibility to it. And then if we still have time after that, I've got a few slides that show some of the really cool discoveries that we've made over time. So anyway, that's hopefully what we're in store for. I don't want to talk really too much about the history of the entire county because we're sort of focusing on the courthouses. But I do think this is kind of an interesting map. It dates to 1879, and it shows sort of the county landholders at the time. But what's interesting about it is the towns that it does show, and it's kind of hard to see in this, so I highlighted them. And you can see Velasco, Quintana, Brazoria, and Columbia, which were really the major towns in early Brazoria County because they had access to the river. And sort of the, Manville, Liverpool, Sandy Point, those were sort of minor communities. I think some of those did not even exist prior to the construction of the railroad. Angleton is shown here with an asterisk where it is because it did not exist at the time, which is also quite funny. So access to river and river travel was really sort of the dominant feature of how early Brazoria developed. The first courthouse in the town of Brazoria was built in sort of phases, and its work started. It's one of the very earliest courthouses in the state, actually. It was started in 1839. According to our newspaper accounts, the builder was a guy by the name of C.J. O'Connor. Some accounts say that the wood for this building was actually shipped into Texas from other states, which I find very interesting. There was no sawmill, perhaps that could build or could produce the heavy timber needed for this building. It's kind of a nondescript two-story wood frame building, but it does have very large windows for the time. These are 12. These are really large glass windows for their time. And if you kind of look at the large window over the top has this sort of fan-shaped crescent window, which is also quite unusual. But you can see a very simple hipped roof, two tall brick chimneys. So it was heated with probably wood-burning fireplaces. The courthouse undoubtedly was on the second floor, although we don't have a plan of what how the interior layout actually went. And this building continued to be the courthouse for some time. Eventually, it was sold and moved. This is a great picture of it. I think this is probably as they are moving it. But it was sold and moved down the street in Brazoria, and I believe it was used as a hotel for some time before it was ultimately destroyed during the 1900s storm. But it was a very stout early courthouse. But because of growth in I believe it was 1894, Brazoria County hired one of the most prominent architects in Texas to design a courthouse. It was a guy by the name of J. Riley Gordon. He was not originally from Texas. He was born in Westminster or Winchester, Virginia. His family moved here to San Antonio when he was 11. He apprenticed for various people, including a guy by the name of W.C. Dodson in San Antonio before he opened up his own firm. But he did 18 courthouses in his existence in Texas before he moved out of state. Brazoria is sort of in the middle of those. But what's very interesting about him is that he was able to come up with a design that he tried to patent it, and he reused it on numerous courthouses. We're very lucky that we have some of his original drawings. They're in pretty poor condition, but the museum does have some of the original drawings to that 1895 courthouse. And believe it or not, the estimated cost at the time was about $51,000. So, and so this was the second courthouse. And what was unique about his design was that it was basically a symmetrical building, but he used these sort of rounded corners as entry points. So it's like the traditional courthouse. It still allowed 4 corners of entrance into the building, but that allowed him to change keep the massing centralized, and allowed him to do these really elaborate central towers, and it allowed him to sort of decorate it in whatever style he saw fit. Now, this is typically called the Romanesque revival style of architecture, and I was going to go into that just a little bit because a lot of people sort of don't understand what that means. The original Romanesque period started in the 8th century, and so that's not what we're talking about. This is a church that I believe still exists in Germany, but it was primarily consisted of ecclesiastical buildings, but they were known for their symmetry, very thick masonry walls, circular or sort of half circular openings. Frequently, they had a lot of contrasting elements. So you can see in this particular instance, the masonry, they used 2 different, completely different types of masonry to sort of contrast the vertical support elements from the rest of the building. But that's the Romanesque period. What we call Romanesque revival started in the 1870s. You have to remember, the United States did not have its own architectural style. So in the Victorian era, architects were sort of picking and choosing, trying to come up with something that that would help define their buildings or set their buildings apart. So Romanesque revival period, starting in about the 1870s, combined some of these early Roman and Byzantine architecture elements. So they typically still had a lot of symmetry. They still had very thick masonry walls. They used the semicircular openings, and this building, of course, has the contrasting masonry. One of the biggest proponents of it was an architect by the name of H.H. Richardson. This is his church in Boston, which still stands. He was kind of an eccentric guy. In his later years, he started wearing monk's robes, and this is a picture of him sitting at his table in a monk's robe. But anyway, this is sort of the architecture that J. Riley Gordon was looking at and that he was using in his designs at the time. But certainly that wasn't the only thing that he was using. He did the Aransas County Courthouse in Rockport, which sort of combines some Romanesque revival elements, but it has this funky sort of Moorish dome on the top, and you can see sort of these horseshoe windows. Sadly, this building was destroyed, but he also was the architect of the Bexar County Courthouse in San Antonio, which is on the right, and it is much more Romanesque revival in style, and you can see sort of the heavy base or plinth of the building, and then just sort of the very heavy masonry elements used throughout. But like I said, the design for Brazoria was a design that he used multiple times. He used it in Comal, he used it in Lee County and Giddings. He used it, this is pretty much the closest twin that he had to it, which was the courthouse in Van Zant. So you can see between the red courthouses here are courthouses that are no longer standing, but starting with Gonzales, he used the same design 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times between 1894 and 1899. I believe Lee County and Giddings was the last one that he did. In 1896, there was a very controversial county seat election attempting to move the courthouse out of Brazoria to a more central location. And I won't go into the politics behind the election, but I will say that, you know, there was a financial undertone to most of these county elections that attempted to move county seats. This is one of my favorite quotes. It's not specifically regarding Brazoria County, but a county seat election is the most dreadful thing known to politics and engenders more feelings than a presidential contest. We have yet to hear of an election of this kind being held without bloodshed. So sometimes these things could end up being very bloody contests. And when you think about why that is, you know, the courthouse was not just the seat of government, but frequently it was also the seat of business within a county. And I believe this is San Marcos, but I really liked this. This is a Sanborn map from probably 1890s, about the same time. But you can see that not only is you can see that the courthouse square, which was used to buy and sell goods on a weekly basis, but also all the surrounding businesses that grow up around that building. And even after Angleton had won the election, you can see in the newspapers that there's an attempt to sort of buy up land holdings in Angleton. And on the right, you can see it says several new buildings have already been contracted for to be erected immediately. So it wasn't just a political contest. There was a financial contest as well. So, you know, the county commissioners at the time, they did not want to hire the same architect just a few years later to build the new courthouse in Angleton. So they asked the guy who was one of the builders of the courthouse in Brazoria, a Scottish guy by the name of Thomas Lovell. He was a contractor from Brownwood. He worked on numerous courthouses. He's actually credited as designing a few of them. But he was a contractor on Brazoria County. And what he did was he presented the plans that he had in his possession for the courthouse in Matagorda to the Commissioner's Court in 1897. And the Matagorda County Courthouse in Bay City was completely different in design to sort of what J. Riley Gordon did. And this is one of the early postcards of it. And you can see it sort of has these tall, they're called mansard roofs at each of the four towers, each of the four entrances. And then it has, this is not a masonry tower, this is probably a metal clad tower in the middle. But like most courthouses, you know, it had a very large courtroom upstairs, which served the district court. So the drawings that he showed were actually done by another architect by the name of Eugene Heiner. He was practiced out of Houston. He was from New York. He apprenticed for a while in Chicago and then later in Germany. His first commission out of the gate, I believe, was the Galveston County Jail. But if J. Riley Gordon was sort of the most prominent architect of the time, this guy was a very close second. And he did not use one, like Gordon, he did not use one particular architectural style, but he tended to sort of pick and choose different styles as he saw fit. So if you look at his courthouses, they have elements of sort of Second Empire, Renaissance Revival, Romanesque Revival style. And here's just sort of a brief summary of, this is not all of them, but this is a few of them. And you can see sort of a lot of similarities across the years. The first one in Galveston, you know, is sort of a very tall, slender building, but you can see it has mansard roofs and these little oculus windows on the roof. But you can see that same design sort of used in Polk County, Trinity County. The courthouses start to get a little bit more massive in the late 1800s, but they keep a lot of the same elements. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about Second Empire style too, since I talked about Romanesque Revival. It's kind of important to talk about what Second Empire really means. But Second Empire style used in the Victorian era was really sort of drawing on styles that were popular in the French Renaissance. So the time of Napoleon's Second Empire. They were usually symmetrical, sort of a very strong massing. very distinct what's called mansard roofs, so that very steep roof right on the facade of the building, which allowed them to sort of dress it up with more ornament. And they were typically very heavily ornamented, you know, with hoods over the windows. And in this drawing, you can see sort of the decorative swags over the arched windows and the medallions over the pedimented windows. So typically they had quite a bit of ornament to them. So Eugene Heiner, you know, was approached because he had done the plans for Matagorda, and he agreed to provide the plans and the specifications to Lovell for a fee, with the only condition that the plans be returned after the building was completed. So that may be why we don't have plans of this building to the day. They were probably returned after construction. As far as we know, he never visited the courthouse during construction. I kind of think he was too busy working on sort of his most well-known courthouse, which is the courthouse in Hallettsville, the Lavaca County Courthouse. They did select a gentleman to be sort of supervising architect on a daily basis, a guy by the name of J. Arthur Tempest. And curiously, Heiner's not listed on the cornerstone of the building. So this is probably one of the earliest pictures we have of the courthouse, and it's one of my favorite pictures of the courthouse because it just sort of shows how prominent the building is on the open plain. There's just not much around as of yet. I don't think this does not predate the 1900 storm. I'm guessing this is 1905 to 1910. And primarily because of the date. This is done by a Houston photographer by the name of Frank Slaughter, and who photographed extensively. But all of the early cresting on the building, which you would have had on the flat parts of the roof, all of that is gone. But you can see the one of the changes that was made over the Matagorda Courthouse was they moved the tower to the front of the building, so it's much more prominent. Because it's in the front, it allowed them to do a masonry tower, which the other buildings did not have. The other thing I really like about this building is it shows the entry doors open, and you can see all the way through the building. And I've never known if that's a dog standing there or what that actually is. I like to think it's a dog that's just, you know, walked into the courthouse, but we really don't know. Let's see. Shortly thereafter, they built a jail on, I guess it's the northeast corner of the building. But I kind of like this picture too because it shows the east side of the courthouse, and you can see it had sort of the similar mansard roofs that the Matagorda building did. And you can see the original clock tower and the chimneys. This is a picture with probably the sheriff and the deputy and with their rifles and their trusty hound dog. It's also really hard to see in this picture, but there's a windmill in the process of being erected sort of right in to the left of the jail. Anyway, we don't really know, because we don't have those plans, we don't know how the original offices were allocated, but we do know that it was a traditional sort of cross-axial plan of a courthouse with stairs on the east and west ends of the building. But so these are some of the offices that we think, you know, where the tax assessor was. Obviously, the county judge was down here in one of these offices. The commissioner's court was in one of these offices, probably on the east side. One of the interesting things, though, about the building is that it used not really a new structural system, but a different structural system than most courthouses of this era. And it's a combination of steel I-beams that have corrugated metal sort of arched between them, and then they fill that space with a very sort of loose quality concrete. So this is a concrete mixed with rock, and I think it has brick shards in it, which you'll see in some future photographs. The second floor, the district courtroom took up, and still does, the majority of the second floor and sort of bisects it in half. So it only really leaves 4 offices up there based on the original plan. The tower on the south side of the building was the district judge's office when he was in attendance. Interestingly, the back of the courtroom had stepped seating, which a lot of people don't know. I found evidence to this, but I could not verify it until we eventually found some photographs that seemed to back it up. Here's one of those photographs. This is probably about 1910. It's one of the earliest photos, if not the earliest photos, of the courthouse, showing the second floor courtroom. But it's a very early county fair. You can see that the ladies here have put out all of their quilts and dishware and painting, sort of showing off things from the county. I think it's also interesting that this is probably the most prominent booth there on the second floor, but Angleton is very prominent. And you can see off to the left Alvin, and I can't remember which, I can't see which one is off to the right, but Angleton is sort of front and center in all of this. But they've covered the judge's bench, so you can't really see that. But you can see that there were two windows behind the judge's bench that allowed some light to come in through the tower. And they've also covered, but you can see the iron smokestacks to the left and the right of this booth. So they had cast iron stoves in here that they used for heat. And those flues went out into the chimney spaces. You can also see a little bit of the original courthouse courtroom railing in the foreground and the jury box off to the left. The other thing is you can see part of the original press tin ceiling, and I think this is the only photograph that shows it. Sadly, we don't have any remnants of that. This is the other picture that we have, early picture that we have. I believe this is a glass plate photograph of the courtroom, probably about the same time. It may actually be the same fair. But this shows the original theater style seating that was in the courtroom. And yeah, I debated for a long time on these columns because these columns are pretty significant, but we don't think that they're original to the building. We don't think that there was a balcony in this courtroom. You can sort of see off to the right that you can see above the columns, and there's no evidence that there was a floor structure. I personally think that these were added for the county fair. They may have survived for a while, more than just a year. But if you sort of look to how it's attached to the wall off to the left, it's kind of a temporary thing. But what you can see, if you look at the railing there, is that it slopes up towards the back of the towards the back of the courtroom, and you can see one step on the left. So it was stepped as you go back. Interestingly, so Matagorda County did have a balcony, and this was kind of what we were comparing it to. But you can see it has a ceiling over it, and the columns are fluted columns, sort of more in keeping with the architecture of the building. So anyway, I think there's little doubt that there was never a balcony in this courtroom. So by 1912, though, the county had grown to the point where they had run out of space, and this traditional plan, there's a lot of space that's allocated just for the very wide corridors going across. I think they're like 12 or 15 feet across. So the very first addition in 1912 was a tax collector's vault on the southeast corner of the building. It was just a single room structure, slab on grade. We only have one really good photograph of it. This is a photograph that I think was taken in 1913 during the terrible flood of 1913. So this is probably December of that year, which is when the flood happened. But you can see the addition off to the right, and they did, they tried to match the brick and match the window detailing exactly so that it would fit in with the courthouse. What's also interesting about this picture, besides the floodwaters, is you can see the two men standing on the roof, sort of surveying the flooded conditions throughout the town. The other thing that's interesting is you can see these sort of dark squares at the top of the tower, and those are tie rods and tie plates. So very early on, they had some structural issues with this tower, and those were an attempt to correct movement that was probably happening in that tower. So the first really major addition didn't happen until 1920, and that was the west two-story addition to the building. And it was actually built out of concrete and attached to a masonry structure, which is kind of interesting. The architect was a guy by the name of John McClelland out of Houston, and we actually do have his original plans. And it's interesting to me because what they did is they took out the windows that were on the west side of the building, and they substituted vault doors and chimney flues. We lost those original windows, but they were reutilized as part of the new building or new addition. And those were basically storage spaces for the county clerk, which you see on the left here in blue. And the second floor, they added a jury sleeping room. So when they would sequester a jury overnight, that was where they bunked them. And the remainder of it was a district clerk's office. What's also kind of curious about this is the district clerk's office was accessed actually from the stair landing. You could not go through the sleeping room or through the actual district clerk's office to get there. So, and you can sort of see that in the structure when you're downstairs today. The only really good picture that we have of this west addition is from this photograph, and I don't know what's going on in this photograph. I've tried to find out. It looks like these gentlemen are part of some sort of charity campaign to raise money. They're standing next to their jalopy, and there's a very old record player in their hands. And I've tried to sort of decipher the letters on the side of the car, but basically it's something along the lines of what difference just a few $100s make, which is why I think they're trying to raise money for a charity. But on the courthouse, I believe this is fairly recently constructed because there's piles that I think are construction debris in the foreground. There's also a big wood barrel that may have been an early cistern for water between the car and the courthouse. It's also one of the only pictures we have that show the north side of the building. Probably the biggest change in the building happened in 1927. They sort of destroyed the little vault on the east side and built a two-story addition. The architect was a guy by the name of Lewis Glover, and the contractor I believe out of Houston was Tom Tellefson. And basically what was done at the time was the tower, because of its structural condition, was destroyed, and the two-story concrete framed addition was built on the east side. So now we have this sort of brick and concrete structure in the middle, and then concrete buildings added to the east and the west. Part of that work, though, was to remove the original east stairway, cast iron staircase, and sort of rotate it. So they had a more direct access into what was now the tax collector's office. Also at the time, they built a vault adjacent to the tax collector's office. And on the second floor, I believe the large room was the commissioner's courtroom, and the county judge and the county attorney moved up there as well. They also built a little boiler room that currently exists on the north side of the building. As far as I know, though, the courtroom did not have any changes at the time. At least I don't have a record of them. But from the outside, the changes were quite noticeable. With the loss of the tower, they added some classical elements to replace it, and on the center of the facade, so you see these sort of fluted columns added. You see this arched window, sort of a broken pediment with a clock in the middle. Obviously, the sloped roofs are gone on the two sides, and the entire building was stuccoed at that time. So all the brick, except for some around the south entrance, was completely obscured. What's also interesting, and we'll show this later, is they had some decorative tile in these arched windows, and I believe these arched windows were added at that time to the left and the right of the center bay on the south side of the building. And the palm trees, I think, are fabulous. I really like the palm tree look for Brazoria. I believe this was there are other photographs that show them sort of testing fire equipment. I believe that's why the fire department is shown in this. Here's the interior of the east addition on the first floor. So this is the tax collector's office, and you can see that the gone is sort of the heavy ornamentation. The light fixtures are very simple pendant fixtures. There's no crown molding. It looks like they took an early wood and iron assembly, like a countertop that they used to probably have facing the public, and they just pushed it up against the wall. So I don't know what that was about. So by 1940, though, the county had outgrown the courthouse completely, and they decided to build the current courthouse sort of on the adjacent property. And the architect was a guy by the name of Lamar Cato, also out of Houston, I believe. But this was a limestone building with a completely concrete frame. And so after that time, the old Brazoria County Courthouse, as it became known, was used for a variety of functions. It functioned as the public library, I believe, until 1976. Here you can see the bookmobile, one of the early bookmobiles in front of the building. It was also the home of the county nurse who ran the Brazoria County Health Unit out of it. This is her. They added a doorway to access the health facility on the west side of the building. They took out a window and changed it to a door. It was also the recruiting service for the U.S. Air Force, and I picked this up at some auction, but I thought it was interesting because it showed the Air Force was using the building. It was also, prior to both of these, it was used as a draft board space in World War II. But by the 70s, the building was pretty run down, and it was in pretty sad shape. This is one of a couple pictures we have from the 1970s, but you can see even the bracketing, even sort of the architectural detailing that was around the cornice is all gone. And you can see a lot of the plaster is deteriorated. I believe that's probably the bookmobile parked at a little carport on the left side of the picture. But it's just pretty sad looking. And so that really began the efforts to try to save the historic building. This is a picture, I believe this is a Chamber of Commerce meeting, but I'm not entirely sure. Somebody from the county could probably tell me. But you can see sort of the dilapidated state of the interior, major water leaks causing plaster to fall off the walls. It looked like several of the ceiling panels had fallen out. I'm not sure I would have attended this without wearing a hard hat. Things are looking pretty dire. I'm not going to go into a whole lot about the renovation efforts in the late 70s and 80s, but there are some really interesting photographs that have come out of that. The first one sort of shows how they, on the left, sort of shows how they attach their wood floors to that concrete structure. So what they actually did is they would set nailers in that concrete as they laid it. And here you can see, this is actually the second floor courtroom, but you can see those nailers gave them places to nail their wood flooring too. And so the original flooring in there was probably longleaf pine. And then on the right is sort of the proof that the stairs actually existed in the back of the courtroom. You can see where the brick is exposed, you can see there's little holes that sort of slope upwards. And they occur about the height of the wainscot and about the height of the stairs. And those were, when they actually built the building, they would leave little spaces and put little wood blocks in there to give them places to nail wood to as the building was being built. So we know that there were wood nailers in there and that they were used for the steps and the wainscoting in the back of the building. So anyway, I wanted to talk about some of the recent work because I think we do have time. Very early on in this project, in doing things, we realized that there was a lot of there was a lot of damage to the exterior of the building. A lot of it seemed to be focused on the two sides of the courtroom, the east side and the west side. And so a lot of our early work looked at sort of what the conditions were under the stucco on both of those sides. And one of the things that we found out was the original wood trusses that span from one side of the courtroom to the other, they actually are embedded into the masonry walls, and they sit on sort of wood bases or wood plinths. And those plinths were embedded in the masonry, and they were severely deteriorated. So here you can see the brick was removed, and you can just see how wide that plinth was. And you can see some of the rot, and some of it was termite damaged. But you can see how extensive that was. The actual end of the truss you can see at the very top, and it too is rotted and deteriorated. So the sort of the first phase that I worked on back in 2011 had to deal with exterior envelope and trying to restore some of the early wood windows. So here's a view looking down at the window, and you can see just how extensively rotted those wood sills were. Not just the sill itself, but the wood framing below the sill. So we ended up replacing a lot of those sills with new, I believe it's cypress material, and restoring a lot of those earlier original wood windows. Here's a picture looking up in the attic, though, that kind of shows you some of the dire conditions that existed up there. This particular in the middle of this photograph, you can see what was one of those original chimneys, and over time somebody bashed a hole in it and used it for wiring. So this masonry is completely unsupported up there. You can see one of the original trusses off to the left of this picture, and to try to help things, the brick has been sort of wrapped around the end of the truss. That really just kind of exacerbated some of the problems. One of the other problems that's very evident in this picture is all of these joists coming down into the wall are actually sitting on wood that is embedded in the wall. And so over time, a lot of that wood, even though it's 3 stories in the air, a lot of that wood rotted. So sort of the second phase of work involved attic structural repairs. So sadly, most of the public will never get to see these, but I thought you might be interested in seeing some of the photographs. We took out those wood plinths and we replaced them with concrete plinths. And then we, because those trusses were actually sagging, and the courtroom ceiling was actually sagging, the structural engineer designed this galvanized steel plating system to sort of anchor and strengthen the ends of all of those courthouses up there in the attic. So that was probably the primary component of the second phase of work. And I will say, we do still have some wood embedded up there in the wall, which you can see in this picture. But we do try to kind of keep an eye on it and monitor it. It's very difficult to sort of pull all of that out at any given time. So the next phase of work that I was involved with started in about 2016. And one of the problems with the building was that there was no ADA compliant access to the second floor. And there was a chairlift that kind of ran along the staircase, but it was not compliant with the current ADA requirements. And the building really required an elevator. But if you remember that floor plan, the courtroom takes up 70% of the second floor. So trying to find a location for that elevator becomes problematic. And we ended up picking one of those 4 rooms, original 4 rooms that was adjacent to the courtroom. Obviously, we can't bring the elevator up inside the courtroom, so we had to pick an adjacent room. But sadly, this was where one of the 1920s vaults built. So we had to convince the historical commission that this was indeed the best place for the elevator, and we ended up taking out part of this 1928 vault. It's kind of interesting because the photograph on the right shows the door sort of facing in one direction, and the original drawing on the left sort of shows one of the two vault doors facing the other direction. I didn't find any evidence that it was actually built as it was drawn, though. But we did find some interesting things in taking that masonry out. And that included a lot of original paint and sort of the paint that existed on the walls when the vault was put in the 1920s. So on the left, you can see the brick was just stacked up against an existing plaster wall, and so that plaster wall survived. And so the paint at the time in the courthouse was sort of this bluish green, which was very popular at the time. But even below that, you can see sort of a buff yellow paint that was probably the earliest paint in the building. The picture on the right is also kind of interesting because the brick on the left is not attached to the wall at all, but the brick on the right was actually keyed into the masonry. So you can see those rectangles where the new brick was sort of set into the wall. The other thing was, when this was built, again, there was a window in this location. And so if you sort of look hard, you can see where that window was. The light, they didn't do a perfect job of infilling that window, but all of that sort of lighter masonry in the middle of the picture was where that original window once existed. If you're interested, we also, as part of the elevator work, we had to dig down, and the original foundation is actually a brick foundation. It steps out to sort of provide more bearing area, but we did have to dig down to the bottom of the original foundation. So the guys to the right in this picture are actually standing in what is the crawl space. And you can see, though, the original steel beams embedded in the masonry, and that was part of the problems that we were dealing with, was that this steel was very heavily corroded. Here's a picture after the flooring is removed, and the steel where it sat in the masonry had corroded so badly that I could just about stick my finger through it. So it was in dire straits, and the elevator project was, in addition to putting in a new elevator, part of the idea was to test putting in a new floor system so that we know what that looks like, and we know how to budget it for future projects. We also did uncover some, it's not original ceiling, but because the original ceiling was actually plaster, but very early on they added a beaded board wood ceiling, and there are remnants of it throughout. Sadly, a lot of this had dry rot, and we were not able to save it, but we tried to save as many pieces as we could. But under the beaded board and the plaster, and you can see evidence of the plaster here in some of the wood haunches that they used to support the lath. But the second floor is also sort of that steel beam construction with the concrete poured on top of it. So this is the contractor was in the process of opening this up to allow construction of the elevator shaft, which is why some of it is damaged up in the top of the photo. So anyway, this is our the current design for the elevator. We worked very hard to sort of keep the elevator shaft off of the window because I don't like to block windows. So we made a small little closet space there. It wasn't initially supposed to have a door, but it ended up having a door. And then we kept the 1920s vault door that opened to the east. So that is now storage space for them. Curiously, this is a new type of elevator, so it does not have an elevator equipment room. All the electronics are controlled within the wall. But that project helped us prepare to replace the other vaulted concrete floors on the first floor. And so in 2019, we started that work. You can see how bad some of that corrugated metal was in. It was literally had holes in it, and the concrete itself was very fragile. So, when we took all of those beams out, it was quite a mess. This, I believe, was under the restrooms because we also took the opportunity to put in new ADA restrooms. This was the restroom plumbing at the time that we took those floors out. So we've tried to consolidate as much of this as as was possible at the time. So this is the new floor structure, which consisted of galvanized steel beams running across, and then a metal corrugated metal was placed on these, and a new slab was poured. But this slab was also keyed into the walls. So we not only have the galvanized beams, the concrete slab is keyed into the walls. So, and you can see they cleaned up this part of the crawl space much nicer. And we tried to clean up some of the masonry openings too. So we still have a lot of work that needs to be done on this building. We've taken care of all of the raised concrete floors, but some of the floors, including all of the main hallways on the first floor and the 2 vaults, were actually poured on grade, and they are problematic. And I believe I have some photos that show some of that. Unfortunately, to remove and replace those slabs, we're going to have to take out some historic tile in one of the vaults. We're going to salvage as much as humanly possible and reinstall it. Part of the scope also involves relocating the library down to the first floor and moving some of their archival storage up to the second floor. And now we've done the first floor restrooms, we need to upgrade the second floor restrooms. Finally, at some point, the existing roof is going to need replacement, and there's a lot of exterior stucco repair that still needs to happen. And I also say there's still some window restoration that needs to happen. Just some photos that kind of show that. This is a contractor holding a level that shows you how much the floor in the first floor corridor has sagged over time. Remember, originally it was just poured on grade, but over time that grade has settled and the floor has sagged with it. And in some cases, the soil has sagged and the floor has not. This is actually under the the west stairs. And you can see how large the void is between where the ground level is now and the slab. I think because it's around the stairs, sort of was held upwards. You can also see that this concrete was just poured over brick rubble. So it's not really a well-designed or installed concrete slab. This is some of the original vault tile. Like I said, the floor in the vaults also sags pretty severely, about 3 inches, I think, to the middle of the floor. So we're going to need to take it out as well. We have, in this current phase of work that's upcoming, we're going to take this tile out. We're hoping to salvage as much as humanly possible and reinstall it. So if we still have time, I wanted to talk very briefly about some of the past discoveries that we've uncovered in all of these phases of work that I find very interesting. And there's only about, I think, 5 or 6 of them. But during one of the early phases, the contractor dug these little metal fragments, iron fragments, out in the yard when they were running downspouts for the gutters. And we very quickly realized that this is part of that original roof cresting that was probably lost in the 1900 hurricane. And so here it is laid out, and you can sort of see a little fleur-de-lis design and some little curved arches. So I kind of think, even though we don't have photographs, I kind of think it's very close to sort of this top. This is a 1890s catalog of cast iron cresting, but this top row, the third one from the left, is very similar to what we found. Hopefully, if we continue digging, maybe we'll find enough that we can recreate more of it and confirm that that's the actual design. The other thing was underneath the west stairs, I'm sorry, the east stairs, there was a remnant of the original bead and board wainscoting, and I was very surprised to find it. It was the only piece that remained in the entire building. Sadly, contractors over time had screwed conduit into it, but We worked very hard to preserve this, and it was taken out, and I believe Bruce at the museum has done a very good job of cataloging every single piece. But you can see sort of the alternating grooved boards, vertical boards, and the flat boards. And unfortunately, we don't have the cap to this, but we have everything else, I believe. This kind of shows the original baseboard. This is the only place that was found in the entire building. So I'm very happy that we have a surviving piece of this. Originally, of course, it wasn't painted, and you can see where there's a brown piece where a molding was removed. Originally, it was a stained finish, a clear finish. So the other thing that's kind of interesting is if you crawl around in the attic enough, you come across an area that still shows the original brick. And all of the ornamentation, or trimmings as they were called, were not done in stone, as it kind of looks like in the photograph. They were actually done in plaster, or stucco. And so, here you see, this is I believe it's the original southwest corner of the building, up in the attic, and you can see original brick, probably original mortar, and those original plaster or stucco belt coursings. So that's kind of interesting. This wasn't really a surprise, but it's part of an original, I believe, pressed metal ceiling that exists under the west staircase. And this was probably, as you entered the courthouse from the west, this was the little vestibule that was there. And I believe this is a surviving remnants of the original metal ceiling that exists up there. But a lot of people don't know that it's there. So in the current phase, we're going to try to salvage this and restore it and put it back in. That original staircase, currently it's painted, one is painted, I believe, green, and the other is painted black, but there's evidence to suggest that it may have been polychromed if you look up on the staircase and crawl through to a certain access point. I don't know that for certain. We're still looking at this, but it's kind of interesting to find this piece hidden up there. The other thing that was kind of interesting in taking out the floors, well, two things are kind of interesting about this. One is you can see that sort of level where there's black material that's just dripping downwards. That was sort of the base level that all of the steel I-beams were sitting on. And actually the contractors put in when they built up to that point, they put a level of coal tar or some sort of bitumastic material there, and it was an early water barrier. So any water or moisture in the crawl space or even below grade, the bricks have a tendency to soak up that water, but it could not get past that point. So that's kind of very interesting, and you can kind of see, the condition of the bricks below that point in the crawl space is much poorer. They have much less mortar than the bricks above that point. But really what this photo is about is it shows a void in the wall. And the original vaults, most people think that the walls are thicker in the vaults, and most people think that it is just solid masonry all the way through. But there's actually a void in there that sort of helps prevent the contents of the vault during a fire, because it acts as an airspace. So, if it had been sort of solid masonry all the way through, the vault would tend to act as an oven, and heat would be transferred through that. But by putting an airspace in there, you actually protect sort of the interior side of the vault. So here you can see looking into that vault space, and then this is sort of looking up into the wall, showing both sides. And they even went so far as to when they were mortaring the brick, as to mortar the sides going up. They still have some bricks that have to connect the wall, connect the inner and the outer part of the wall, but I thought that was very interesting. So anyway, those are just a few of the discoveries. There's probably a lot more that I could talk about, but those are the ones that I find most exciting, and I'm open to answering questions, and I thank you all for your attendance.
Well, thank you.
I'm out of time.
Well, no, you did great. Thank you so much for joining us this evening and sharing your experience and your discoveries here at the museum. I know I've learned a lot, even though I come here every day. You don't notice all these things, so that's very interesting. I just want to remind everybody, if you have a question or you want to have something you'd like to say, at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you should see a chat button. Just click on that chat button and then a box will pop up and you can type in your question. And then, or just say me, just type in me, and then I will unmute you so that you can ask your question. We won't turn on your video. We don't have the ability to do that, but we can hear you. So if you have a question, just type in that chat, that button, okay? Again, I just want to remind everybody that we have another program coming up, September 9th. Dr. Frank de la Teja will be presenting Texas and the Mexican War of Independence. So be sure to log in for that virtual program. I'll go ahead and get us started. I don't see any questions just yet, so I'll give everybody a chance to type those in. But I actually had one quick question.
Sure.
So you talked about the architect. I guess you said his name was Herner? I'm sorry,
Eugene Heiner. Yes.
Heiner. Okay.
Yes.
But you mentioned before him Lavelle. So what was Lovell's role as far as the architecture goes? Because I was kind of confused. So it's just one architect?
So Lovell was the contractor who worked on the courthouse, or one of the contractors working on the courthouse in Brazoria. And I think the Commissioner's Court sort of appreciated his expertise. And, you know, at the time they were looking for an architect to design the new courthouse, and Lovell, who also happened to be working on the courthouse in Matagorda, had those plans in his possession. And so I think he approached Commissioner's Court and said, hey, why don't we ask this guy, I'm working on his building in Matagorda County, and here's the plans if you want to see them. And, you know, I'm sure he sort of touted Eugene Heiner's abilities as an architect. I think it's very interesting, sort of the differences between the two buildings, in that, you know, they county commissioners sort of negotiated, I guess, to get a tower in front of the building as opposed to doing an exact copy of Matagorda. And so, you know, there may have been an attempt to not only sort of improve or outdo the courthouse in Brazoria, but also an attempt to sort of one up Matagorda as well. I really wish we had those drawings, because I'd love to actually see them, but sadly they haven't survived that we've been able to find. So
if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, the courthouse they built, the brick courthouse or the granite courthouse they built in Brazoria, cost more money than the courthouse they built here in Angleton. Is that correct?
That's a good question. I believe it did too. And it was pretty elaborate, because, you know, it had sort of the polychromed brick, you know, the entrance columns, I think, were granite, and it was all sand. It was all red Paco sandstone that had to be shipped in. So I don't doubt for a second that it cost more than this building. And that may have been a selling point as well, because, you know, I think a lot of people were probably upset that they just paid for this new courthouse and now they're building another one. So I'm sure that trying to be a little thrifty was on all of the commissioners' minds in 1897.
Because it was only, what, 2 years after they built the one in Brazoria that they built the one in Angleton. Is that correct?
I think it was finished 3 years after the one in Brazoria. So.
Okay. Those are just some of the things I remembered. Well, I'm not seeing any questions. So I just want to thank you again for joining us.
I put them all to sleep.
No, not at all. I think you're just so thorough. Like I said, I only had that one question, and then I remembered about, I know a little bit of the history, so I remembered about the other one. Oh, I did
Yeah.
want to ask, that
And,
vault, so the airway there in the vault space, is
mhm.
that plaster or is that mortar? Or
I
not
think they,
plaster, stucco, I'm sorry, stucco, or is that
yeah,
mortar?
I think they probably were just mortaring the brick up as they went, and so I believe it's just mortar that they sort of scraped on the sides, which
Okay,
probably helps a little bit with the fireproofing.
okay. Because you said there was
And
stucco in the attic, right? Or did you say
right,
plaster?
right. It's a Portland, basically it's a it's a Portland cement plaster um, used on the outside, and it was used in lieu of sort of stone. So to do that detailing on the exterior out of plaster or stucco rather than stone was also a huge cost savings.
Okay. Now, last question, I promise.
Sure.
Um, do you have any idea why they may have chosen to stucco over the brick? I mean, the brick was beautiful. I'm just curious why they may have chosen to stucco over it instead of just leaving the brick.
Yeah, I don't know. There's several possibilities. One, it could have just been the architect's decision to try to unify the building. And you know, the with the central building and then one, two additions, he may not have been confident that he could have matched that original brick. And I'm not sure how well the 1920s brick matched the original brick. So maybe it was a aesthetic decision that was done to just unify the building and make it um, uh, sort of have a common appearance across all the original building and the two additions. The other thing is it just was his attempt to modernize the building and sort of step away from some of the Victorian ornamentation. It was the 1920s. The Victorian era was seen as old-fashioned, so it was an attempt to modernize the appearance of the building. At least
Okay.
those are my theories.
No, that makes sense. That does make sense. We do have one comment that just says from Joy Kennedy saying, thank you. Interesting information. Thanks for sharing. So, well, and thank you, Joy,
Thank
for
you,
joining us.
Joy.
But I do appreciate it. With that, I think we'll go ahead and call the program over. But again, thank you, Chris, for taking time out of your evening to join us and share all your knowledge about this building. And we're ready to get started on the future, on the rest of the construction that's needed. That'll be taken for quite a while, won't it? It'll be in construction for a while, or?
Yes, it's probably going to be a while, but hopefully if we get the right contractor, they can move things along fairly quickly. But yeah, we expect it to take somewhere between 6 and 8 months.
Okay.
So
Well, I'm sure everyone who's tuned in will find notices posted everywhere about it on our Facebook page and our website, warning
yeah,
them of the construction we're undergoing when we get started. So,
who knows what we'll find in the next phase?
oh,
Stay
that'll be
tuned.
interesting. We may have to have another program so you can show us what you discovered.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you so much. You have a great evening.
Thank you.